Aloha, namaste. This is Alexis, Radha Home Yoga, and I want to talk about our super blood moon, flower moon eclipse that's coming up this coming really the 25th into the 26th, especially here in Hawaii. It's going to be very early in the morning on the 26th that the actual eclipse will take place, and the moon will actually be across from the sun in the wee hours of the morning. So we will, really be sort of seeing this because it will be visible here on the 25th, the night after the 25th. And the fact that this is referred to as a flower moon in the Western tradition has to do with the fact that this is springtime, right? And there's going to be flowers blooming all over the Northern Hemisphere. Well, here in Hawaii, we always have flowers blooming, but this particular moon is falling in the star of Anuradha, which is after Radha. So this is, the goddess of devotion. She's really the lover of the beloved, and the beloved being Krishna. She is the one who shows us the path of love for the divine. And in the ancient texts, the star that was before Anuradha was called Radha also. It was called Radha, and Anuradha was after Radha. And the star is now called Vishaka. And Vishaka is this one pointed star where there's a mission and the native goes for that mission. Over the long haul, results are achieved. So it's depicted by a triumphant gateway is one of the symbols. And it's like a finish line, right? I've done all this work. I've been on this path with one thing in mind all this time, and then I'm able to get to the gateway. Well, Anuradha is depicted as a flower at that finish line. And so I love that it's the flower moon and it's the flower star. But if you think about this in yogic terms, in terms of the practice of yoga, the science and the discipline of yoga, we have these stages, these limbs, the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs of yoga. And they start with these social practices where we sort of refraining from stealing from people, asteya, or we're not harming, we're not practicing harmful actions towards others or other creatures, ahimsa, or we're controlling our sexual energy with brahmacharya. These are social things that we do when we're engaging with others in society. And then we have these personal practices that we take part in that help us, tapas, raising our own fire, doing austerities, practices on ourselves that help to purify us. And cleanliness, sausha, santosha, contentment, svadhyaya, which we're studying, and the part of us that is like Radha, that is able to devote ourselves to the divine as far as pranadhana. So these stages, these are the yamas and the niyamas, are the first 2 limbs of the Ashtanga practice, of the practice of yoga. And then there's asana, which most people are familiar with, the postures. And then there's pranayam, where we're controlling, our breath. We're doing practices to bring our breath into control. And then we have pratyahara, where we withdraw our senses. And this is where we start to have more of a one-pointed vision, right? So in the practice, in the progression of stars, if we're thinking about Vishaka being the original Radha and Anuradha being after Radha, and then being a pair of stars, the path of Vishaka probably starts somewhere around Pratyahara, right? Where we're like withdrawing the senses from all the external things. And then we move into this practice of dhyana, where we're meditating on something. We're fixating our gaze on something. So maybe that's even where Vishaka begins, where this metaphor I'm using begins. And then it moves into dharana, where we actually merge with whatever the object is that we're focusing on. We become one with it, and we understand that we are all one. And then we can reach into samadhi, where we're actually one with everything, right? And the devotion is sublime. And so I think of Anuradha as being at this juncture where we're like cross the finish line and we're no longer having to fixate on one goal. We're actually able to just merge into that divine love and that that higher essence of devotion, where the one point is no more needed and everything is oneness. So Anuradha is a really special star, and it's right in the middle of sidereal Scorpio. And the moon is actually debilitated in Scorpio. It's debilitated in those early stages in Vishaka. And the reason it's debilitated is because there's a lot of emotions in Scorpio. We're actually working through our fear in Scorpio. We've joined with others in Libra, and we have this like relational contracts with people. And in Scorpio, we have to reckon with the fact that we could lose those people. Those people could leave us, they can die. We can die. Everything kind of becomes very heightened as we become deeply aware of how vulnerable we've made ourselves. And we have to reckon with that fear. And that's part of the path of Vishaka. As we move into Anuradha, it eases because we find devotion. So we're no longer at it alone dealing with our fear. We now have God on our side. We now have the energy, the love on our side. And that's what brings us out of our drama, if you will, out of our, need for control and out of our constant toiling with our emotions. So this is one way of looking at it. And that idea of Radha and Anuradha and Vishaka and Anuradha, and that I just want to mention comes from a book I love on the nakshatra. It's called 27 Stars, 27 Gods, and it's by someone named Vic Dikara. It's a really brilliant read on the stars, a little bit different than most of the other texts I've read on the nakshatras. So this is the star of devotion, and it's a time where we can find deep devotion within ourselves. But of course, not only is the moon debilitated, but we also have Ketu, the south node, as this eclipse point, because this is a full lunar eclipse where the sun and moon are across from each other in the full moon. And they're in these places that our eclipse points have been since September 28th of 2020. So I've been talking about these eclipse points for a while. And if you aren't yet on my email list, then you should sign up for that. And you will get a report that right away tells you what these points are hitting in your chart based on your rising sign, based on your Vedic rising sign. So if it's, your first and seventh house, as it is for me and any Taurus or Scorpio rising, you are being affected on the self and others. It's the axis of self and others. And, for some people, it's the 10th house and the fourth house, the house of career, house of what's in your heart. This is true for the people who are Aquarius and Leo. So it really is going to vary for each rising sign what area of your life is activated, and that's why I make those reports, because they're super they're super helpful for people to really understand that. But for all of us, it's in this Taurus Scorpio axis, and we not only have the sun and Venus in Taurus, but we also have the moon in Scorpio. So regardless of whatever axis it is for you, this is true. This is the part that's true for everyone. And I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen so I can show what I'm talking about. So here's the moon joined that south node Ketu, and the sun joined Rahu and Venus. And Mercury has just stepped into his own sign of Gemini, and he's about to go retrograde. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But the moon being engaged with Ketu, being eclipsed by Ketu, is really important to understand, because Ketu is the south node. So it's the part of the nodes, the axis of the nodes, Rahu and Ketu, that is just the body. Rahu is a head, a mouth, taking in experience after experience after experience. And Ketu is the body, the neck down, and it ends in a tail or a knot. And this is the karma that we have from past lives. This is the karma we have from early childhood. This is the part of us that doesn't feel like we need any more action in this world. We're not engaged. There's no head. There's no engagement in the world. But it's this storehouse of knowledge and wisdom that we are constantly using. Like the reservoir of that knowledge is where we hold all of our confirmation biases. It's where we hold the part of us that thinks we know already. And we're constantly focused wherever Rahu is. That's that big mouth. We're just like, ah, oh, give me more of that, give me more of that. But until we look at where Ketu is, we won't really ever be able to properly open that karma on the Rahu end. Rahu's the new karma, Ketu's the old karma. Rahu is where we are like very young and voracious in our appetite. Ketu's where we have no appetite at all. It's all just digested material just sitting there waiting to, be finished, waiting to be freed, really, in the knot. And they have this opposite energy in terms of expansion and contraction. Rahu really expands and like disperses energy wherever it is. And a lot of people have been talking to me about the solar flares and this, like, what's going on with our computers and our phones and why is everything kind of blinking and not operating properly. Well, Sun moved in to join Rahu and this dispersion of energy is happening. Well, K2 is like a microscope. It's like, let's get it to the most minute detail and exact, and this sort of cutting energy or an explosive energy that's beneath the surface. But it's very exact, it's very specific, whereas Rahu is sort of everywhere and magnified. Both are illusory and delusional. I mean, there's actually a quality of delusion wherever the nodes are. And so we see things as really magnified and foreign and other with Rahu, and we're sort of going out into the world with Rahu. And with Ketu, we see things as sort of like, I've already done that. I'm sort of disgusted by it. And there's actually an anger beneath the surface that is not even showing because of this active feeling of like, I've already done that. But the truth is it's quite fiery. So Ketu has a fiery quality and Rahu has an air quality. So these are all things to really understand. Now, in this axis, Rahu, Ketu are actually very strong. Rahu is very grounded in Taurus. There's less dispersion because of that earth energy. If you think of something that is dispersive, and if you ground it in the earth, it won't have as much of that. It won't go as far and it won't be as wild. It'll be more contained. There's a very steady rhythm with Taurus and a constant caretaking of oneself. And so there's a quality that really earths Rahu and allows us to make each new choice and each new effort at opening this karma a little bit slower and steadier and grounded. And with Ketu, we're able to go really deep because Scorpio is a water sign, and the water allows you to just cut right down to the bottom, to the place where it is. And this emotional seamlessness of the water signs really allows for deep penetration, which is what Ketu is ultimately trying to do, to go down, drill down deep into that exact point where something is not right and release it. And in Scorpio, the land of our shadows and our trauma and our drama and our, parts of us that we don't really want to look at, it's that part that goes right down into that trauma and is like, that's the part, that's the thing that needs to be cleared. And then when it clears, it's like, whoo, everything opens up. Well, the moon especially is that emotional part of us, right? It's that most vulnerable part of each of us. And Ketu driving down deep in there can be very intense. People who have moon Ketu in their charts often have like a separation from their emotions, and it can really activate into sort of depression or this really far removed feeling from their own self. And certainly we can see that in transits of moon Ketu as well. But since this is an actual eclipse and we're really going to have the node block out the moon for a moment, and it's like the eclipses are like a blackout where everything stops for a minute, and there is this otherworldly quality where we can receive messages from both the future on the Rahu end and the past on the Ketu end. We have an opportunity to sort of get the download from whatever we need to of our past karma that needs to be cleared here. So there's a lot of room for power despite the debilitation of the moon. And despite the fact that the moon really doesn't like Ketu very much, but neither the sun or the moon really prefer to be with the nodes. The nodes, that like the mythology around the nodes is that they actually were cut in half because the sun and moon ratted on them to Vishnu, that they had taken the soma and pretended to be gods when they were actually demons. So it was, the creation of that ecliptic and that separation of Rahu and Ketu actually comes from this dislike for the sun and the moon, and they're said to always be chasing the sun and the moon, waiting for them to come into those spots so they can catch them and eat them. Basically, the Rahu end is eating, the Ketu end is like enveloping in its void. So that's something to understand, is the sun and the moon don't actually like being in eclipse, right? But we have an opportunity to learn quite a lot in these eclipses. We have an opportunity to really sit in a space of silence or meditation or something that is allowing us to tune into the messages and to really receive them. And this is an opportunity we have at this moment. So this total solar eclipse, or excuse me, lunar eclipse, is also the biggest the moon's going to be in this year in 2021. So that's why it's a super moon, and it'll be, reddish in color, which is why it's called a blood moon. So it's going to be a fantastical sight to see if you live somewhere where you can see it, as I'm blessed too. And it will also be a very powerful emotional experience for a lot of that stuff we've been working through since the end of September of 2020. When the nodes did move into this axis, we've really been working through this emotional terrain and our shadow work, but we've been doing it in a way where we're not as aware. We're more aware of what we're doing on the Taurus end with Rahu there. And of course, we have the sun in Taurus and Venus in Taurus really giving us a lot of energy there also, beyond just the nodes. We have Venus in her own sign, really, giving us a relationship with our happiness, our pleasure, that part of us that wants to have sensory experiences and wants to enjoy our life and eat our food and enjoy our food and enjoy our connections with others, but also sort of enjoy our own sphere and home space and the way that we like to feel. So there's an individualistic quality to Taurus as well. It's not quite as engaged with others as Libra, Venus's other sign. It's more about sort of selfish pleasure or this desire to be okay myself, but yes, to harmonize and share with others too as part of that, especially with things like sexuality and sensual pleasure. And then the sun is our power, and in Taurus, it is a bit earthier, where we hold our power in a different way. I think of Taurus as being a sign that doesn't really want to follow and doesn't really want to lead. So the sun is where we want to lead, right? And it's not where we're the best leaders. When the sun is in Taurus, we're not standing in our power as leaders. We're kind of standing in this place of like, I don't want to be told what to do, but I want it to harmonize. Whatever I do, I kind of want it to harmonize with other people. I don't want to eat all the grass on the field. I want there to be some grass for other people so that I can have friends every now and then, or, there's this idea of harmonizing without compromising too much. That comes when the sun is there, and the sun is also in Rohini along with the North Node. So they're very close degrees. And there's a lot of sensuality and sexuality around this star too. It's the young maiden, the rosy cheek, the red one who's ripe for sensuality. And the sun represents the father, the government, the sort of high power. And the story around Rohini has a lot to do with that, like the creator being her father, wanting to actually mate with her in order to have these beautiful beings on earth. So there's this energy of having Venus herself there, as sort of this sensual maiden, and the sun being in this lustful position. And this, of course, the star Venus is in Mrigashira, is where Rohini turns herself into a deer and runs to earth to get away from her father and away from this responsibility that he thinks she has. And it goes from there. So these two being across the way are reflecting onto this moon, and the sun is always reflecting onto the moon in a full moon, but Venus is also giving that reflectivity of like beauty and happiness and peace, and how do we want everything to be nice and lovely. And in the meanwhile, we also have to do this really deep shadow work if we ever really want things to be peaceful, nice and lovely on the front end, right? If we ever really want that to be, we need to dive deep in the other part of it over here. So we see that, and we can also see that Saturn has now gone retrograde here, right? We have Saturn retrograde as of the 23rd of May. So this is this is important to understand because we actually have Mercury and Jupiter going retrograde too. And I want to make sure I have my dates up and times, because we have there's kind of a lot of specific dates that these different things are happening. And actually, before I talk about that, I want to talk about the hours of the eclipse. That's right, because pulled it up. So we have our eclipse, like the full eclipse, the part where the moon will be completely full, is from 1:11 a.m. to 1:25 a.m. Hawaii time. So we're GMT -10. We're 3 hours behind West Coast time, Pacific time during this daylight savings time period. So that's the full moon eclipse, 1:11 a.m. to 1:25 a.m. here. But the penumbral eclipse, where it first starts, and you can see part of it shadowing, will be starting May 25th. So at night at 10:47 p.m. and will be ending at 3:49 a.m. on the 26th. So it's that night from the 25th to the 26th. So Saturn is going retrograde on the 23rd here in Capricorn, and Saturn stays retrograde for a really long period of time. Saturn's retrograde until October 10th, and it's going to remain entirely in the sign of Capricorn. So we're still going to have this sort of Capricornian feeling of our imminent growing old and death and fear and all these things that we've really been working through since last January, since January 2020 when Saturn first moved here. But it's a rerun, right? It's backing up over old ground we've already been through. Like maybe we thought we'd already dealt with all the fear, we'd already dealt with all the death, we'd already dealt with all the trauma. And in fact, we have to go back over it again. And we have to reconsider what we've committed to. That's the big thing with Saturn retrograde. It's like, what have I committed to? So collectively, socially, we have to do this, but also personally, in your own personal life, the different commitments you've made. And again, knowing where these fall in your chart is really important. That's why I do these readings or these forecasts of all 12 signs, because it really shows what area of your life is highlighted. And when you do sign up and you get that Rahu Ketu axis report, you also get one for Jupiter in Aquarius. And the one for Saturn is not sending anymore, but if somebody reached out to me personally, I'd be happy to send that to them just so they can see, because I did that one in January of 2020, where Saturn in Capricorn is for each of the 12 rising signs. But whatever area of your life this is, you're going to really be reconsidering what you've committed to and what you're working through. And of course, collectively too. And how much fear is driving things is really the big thing. Now, Saturn is in his own sign is in very high dignity. So we've been operating with a level of intelligence here. Retrograde slows down the intelligence. It makes us question things that actually probably were pretty good commitments or good choices to make to begin with. So that's part of the problem with Saturn going retrograde in his own sign. Jupiter will also go retrograde, but I think Mercury is up next. Yeah, Mercury is going to be retrograde on the 29th. So and actually, I'm going to just go ahead and show it on here. So we see Mercury is not retrograde yet, but will be. It was really early in the morning for that eclipse. So it's much later in the day, I'm sure, for Mercury. There we go. So Mercury's retrograde, around 2 o'clock or 1:30 or something in Hawaii. And this is the famous retrograde, right? The one everyone thinks about, oh, my computer's failing and all this stuff. And that could also have to do with your phone and your computers having those short outs. Could be that we started into the window of Mercury retrograde, but that was actually happening more around the 14th and 15th when the sun was changing signs into Taurus. Mercury retrograde does ask us to have patience with our different devices and different things, and it might not be the best time to, output communication into the world. But it is also really a powerful time to learn to listen. Like Saturn, Mercury's in his own sign at the start of this, right? He's in Gemini, where we have really good listening skills, and we're really, we're really able to communicate and effectively take in information and sort of discern it and categorize it. So the retrograde action is actually debilitating because it's taking what was already working intelligently and slowing it down. But Mercury just moved here at the eclipse, like, the day of the eclipse or right before that. So, well, probably right like on the 25th, since the eclipse is technically on the 26th, Mercury moved into his own sign. So he's barely in there when he's going retrograde, which means the backward motion will begin. And it's not actual backward motion. It's our experience here on Earth that we're moving. And these planets seem like they've slowed down so much that they actually seem like they're going backwards. Just like the sun moves for us through the zodiac, but in actuality, the sun is not actually moving. So this is like a mirage. Well, Mercury is going to go back into Taurus, let's see, and Venus has already moved into Gemini at this point, and Mercury is going to be back into Taurus by the beginning of June, and now we'll have an exchange of signs between Venus and Mercury. Mercury is also very grounded in Taurus. It has very, there's a quality where our information and our capacity to communicate has this really rooted, slow Taurian energy. So the retrograde action will also be a little bit problematic here. And there's this quality of really and I talked about this in the last video I did, where Mercury in Taurus has a little bit of an agenda of getting along. There's an agenda of bringing pleasure, happiness, harmony, and not really wanting to argue or fight. At that time, Mars was actually in Gemini, which was causing some of that. But we can see that as of June 2nd, Mars will actually be in Cancer. So that part is changing. That part where we had the fire in our sign of communication and our sign of engaging in information of Gemini is now going to be done. And we're just going to have Venus there and Venus and Mercury in this exchange of signs. So a lot of pleasant communication probably happening, but there's still Mars looming here in Cancer. And in this case, Mars actually will be debilitated. So we have this quality of passive aggressive anger, actually quite a lot of anger, because Mars has nowhere to channel it in Cancer. It's like being angry with only pillows around and all you can do is just shout in the pillows. And that actually works for a lot of women. But ultimately, true, real anger, pillows aren't going to cut it. You're going to want to like break some board or, run a mile, do something that really channels that energy physically and gets that out of you. And so in Cancer, we have trouble with that. And instead, we take it out on people in this sort of passive aggressive way where we feel like we've over nurtured, we're over giving, we're unconditionally loving and no one else is doing that in return. And then we get angry. So this passive aggression underneath the surface of this sort of sweet communication can always be an issue. Mars has been sort of the looming issue for Mercury and Venus over these past few weeks, and it's not going to be better when he's debilitated, right? In Cancer, in the place where he's the most dysfunctional. And if you think of Mars as like the general of the army, where discipline and everyday routine and all these things are really important for him to maintain his strength and his courage and his bravery. And then he's like at his, Nana's house or his mommy's house in Cancer. And she's like, letting him sleep in and giving him breakfast in bed. And he doesn't have to get up and do anything. And he's not exercising. He's not working. He's not doing anything. And then he feels kind of lazy and his anger is brewing because he hasn't had anywhere to channel it. He hasn't had anywhere to put it. There hasn't been anything for him to actually show up for. Well, that's Mars in Cancer for you. But anyway, I wanted to focus kind of on Mercury retrograde here and just the fact that we're going to be running back over old themes with communication as well. And since it's mostly going to be in Taurus, it's going to be communication around relationships, especially with this exchange of sign. So the ways in which we've been communicating and maybe the compromises we've made, maybe the things that we've compromised on that we haven't really been all on board with. And yet we've agreed to them because it made us feel good in that moment. And most of the time when we compromise, it's because we want to end conflict, right? Where we're coming from a position of wanting to be in harmony with the other person more than we want to hold to our truth. And sometimes that's really important. I mean, in relationships, that's super important that we sometimes are able to give on our side, but it depends on what truths are at the core of it. And what we've had is Jupiter drishti, and Jupiter's drishti was on Mars here. And it is at this moment on Mercury. I've kind of advanced pretty far because I was going to show where Mercury goes direct again. But basically Mercury goes direct again June 22nd. So we are going to be right back in Taurus, and then he'll go forward. So now I just want to go back to show the drishti that we have of Jupiter on Mercury, and Mars is really far out of this drishti, is like much later degrees. But that Jupiter giving his beliefs, giving that part of us, especially social beliefs, right? In Aquarius, these social justice beliefs we have, where we think we see the corruption or we see the dark side of things, which is a lot of what Varuna, the god of Satyabhishak, specifically represents, where Jupiter is at this point, at least. Let me go back a few days to where our eclipse is. Yeah, we have Jupiter in Satyabishak and Mercury just entering here on Mrigashira. And Mrigashira, remember, is the little girl like fleeing, running away from her dad and all this. And then there's Jupiter here offering beliefs, social justice beliefs of how wrong everything is and how unequal things are and how the power structures that are not okay and are top down. And we need them to be more fair, more equal, more okay for the little people. This fueling this is a lot of where I come up with the idea of the compromise not being fully in truth, right? Like that our truth is not being completely honored in our compromises in our communication, because we have these planets sort of wanting to compromise. And especially when Mercury was in Taurus, which is literally right before this, right? We can see it just moved in, and it moved in on the 25th. So we've been in this more compromising state, especially with the words we speak and the contracts we make with our words. Because our words, when we speak them, are actually bringing things into being also. It's the power of mantra. Why we use mantras, because it's actually bringing in the body of the deities. In the practice of Tantra, they say mantra is Tantra. That's one of David Frawley's sayings. It's the manifestation of the goddess herself is through this word. Well, when we say English words or whatever language you speak, and you're speaking something to be, we're bringing it into being. We're saying, this is this way. And when we make contracts with other people, we're agreeing to things. I mean, in some states, they even honor verbal contracts. I believe in the state of California, they do. And that is really important to understand, that we're making a contract with the things we say. And if we are agreeing on something that we don't actually really truly agree on, because Mars is really here angry, trying to really feeling kind of fired up, but not, the communication part wasn't there. Mercury was here. And our beliefs about the way things are a little bit fueling the way we feel. Then whatever compromises we've made when Mercury's retrograde, we're going to rethink, and we're going to rethink the words we've spoken. We're going to rethink the communication we've spoken, maybe even rethink the information that we've taken in and how we've organized it, for better or for worse. Again, when these planets are in good dignity, the retrograde motion can be quite debilitating. When the planets are in poor dignity, the retrograde motion helps us take more time with that thing that we weren't that smart with, right? That thing that we weren't really doing that well. So I know I've kind of bounced the timer around a little bit here and changed the screen a lot, but also Jupiter is going retrograde, and Jupiter is going to go retrograde June 20th. And it's going to be retrograde until October 17th. But the thing with Jupiter, unlike Saturn, who's going to stay entirely in this sign, Jupiter is going to do what Mercury did, which is go backwards into another sign. And so Jupiter is going to be going back into a sign of debilitation. Unlike Mercury, where he's bouncing from his own house to his friendly house, Jupiter's bouncing from a kind of not his smartest place to like where he's debilitated and the least intelligent. So we have our beliefs are being challenged in this way. And the other thing is Jupiter, like Saturn, stays retrograde for a very long time, right? We're going to have this retrograde cycle from June 20th until October 17th. That's a long time. And the part where it'll be in Capricorn is from September 13th to November 20th. So from September 13th to October 17th, so for 1 month, we're going to have, from September 13th to October 17th, we're going to have a retrograde Jupiter in Capricorn, joined Saturn again. But Saturn will also be retrograde. The ruler will be retrograde. This will very much feel like a rerun of what we've done already, because that was the whole thing that we experienced, leading up to this year. That was kind of what happened to us in 2020. Was then Jupiter went into Capricorn and really had this fear-based ideology. So our beliefs and even laws or ordinances or whatever you want to call them, the things coming out of ruling bodies, the governance was coming from this very Capricornian fear-based place. And we just got Jupiter in Aquarius in April, right? So we just started to feel this renewed hope and optimism. Even though it's still in Saturn sign, it has a quality of like, well, at least we can, create social justice. Like at least we can expand on all the social programs we believe in, or all the ways we think society is structured wrong. And the sort of hope and optimism that comes with that, where it's an air sign and there's a little room to grow and we're not so stuck and so rigid and so frigid. And so this going back into Capricorn will really feel like a big step back for us. And it's going to be long. Both these transits of retrograde Saturn and Jupiter are very long, and they make us question our commitments, like I said, with Saturn, and with Jupiter, our beliefs and our teachers and our teachings and all of those things. And of course, whatever house Jupiter rules for you and whatever house it's in. So that report of Jupiter in Aquarius does still send out from my email list, and you can find out where Jupiter in Aquarius is for you. And you can honestly just count back one to find out what house Capricorn is. So if it's, if you're a Taurus, it's your 10th house, well, then Capricorn's your 9th house. For Taurus people, this is not the worst thing that's ever happened. With, certain other signs, like if you look at it from the perspective of a Aquarius, for example, where this is their ruling planet, this is their rising sign. Their ruling planet is in the 12th house already, where they're feeling a lot of escape and they're feeling a lot of confusion and just not really being present with society. And then Jupiter kind of jumped onto their rising sign as their second lord of value and values and money, and their 11th lord of community and high ambitions that they might have. And so it gives a little boost of optimism, like, okay, now I feel a little bit more like joining the world again, even though really I'm still kind of in this escape pod. And then it's like, okay, it's going back into my 12th house. So whatever I was feeling is like disappearing again. So it can really have a dramatic effect depending on what it is for you. And likewise for across the way from Aquarius is Leo risings. This is their 7th house. So it's going from, oh, okay, maybe there's some hope with the 7th house. It's like, oh, back into the 6th house of like enemies and service and the hard work and all the inimical energy I have with other people. So it can really change. It can really change how you feel when Jupiter jumps back into Capricorn, and what area of your life is really being highlighted and how it's coming through. Because Jupiter is going to rule the same thing. For a Leo person, it rules their 5th house of children and their creativity and anything they love like a child, and their 8th house of their fears and transformation. And so it's either happening through other people, which is at least bringing the Dharma into the structural house of others, or it's happening through the 6th house of hard work, service, effort, victimization. So that's a big difference, as to how it feels and how it's activating in your life. So all of those things, Saturn retrograde, Mercury retrograde, Jupiter retrograde are all going to affect us a lot and run us backwards. Mercury gets the most airtime. I'm not quite sure why Jupiter and Saturn are retrograde for much longer periods of time, and their transits are much hitting us on a much deeper karmic level. It's very big cycles of karma that we're reckoning with because their transits are for so long, and Mercury moves a lot quicker. And then we're also going to have that debilitated Mars coming up. So there's a lot. And I think that was like June 2nd or June 3rd that Mars moves into Cancer and becomes debilitated. So there's a lot of beneath the surface things that are going to be boiling. But in the meanwhile, Venus and Mercury sort of bouncing around in this Taurus Gemini reign, and the sun also kind of try to keep it light on the end of communication and power, and certainly the sun being our actual government. Having the government's communication be very light and like, oh, how can I make everyone happy, when beneath the surface there's sort of all this questioning and revising and going back over things, and really anger beneath the surface. So these are all things that are coming up for us, and I'll do some more videos on those transits as they happen. But for right now, I really wanted to kind of dial in the eclipse and the times of the eclipse, and then sort of show us what's happening in the next couple of weeks, which is a lot. This eclipse is really setting us off into a direction of dealing with a lot of things that we haven't been dealing with, and realizing the things we've stuck pins in. This is a phrase that's been up for me a lot recently. We live in a society, we live in a world, and we live and we were trained from very young age to stick pins in things, to say, this isn't really totally right for me, but I'm going to stick a pin in it and keep going forward anyway. And as a human, as a person, especially as a female person, this is something we're constantly taught, to override what we really feel in order to make other people comfortable, or in order to please authority, or in order to do this, or in order to do that. And the peace being the most important thing, right? That everyone feels peaceful, that being nice is the most important thing. And you really see that a lot in especially spiritual new age community. The most important thing is to be nice. Well, as a woman, I would say that's not really true, because that's basically what we've been taught our whole lives. And the need to get unnice sometimes comes, where you need to, whatever messy, sloppy way you do it, speak your truth. And that, that truth speaking is not really big here in the Taurus Gemini axis, with Mercury being in those placements and with Venus being in those placements. It's not really a lot about speaking truth. And then all of this retrograde action really has people questioning, like, what do I even believe? What am I even committed to? What am I even angry about? Not really understanding all the ways in which we've compromised along the way. All the times we've been like, that doesn't really sit with me. I'll stick a pin in it and keep going forward anyway. Retrograde periods are periods where we get to backtrack and say, I stuck a lot of pins in a lot of things, and actually I'm not really okay with those. And so you need to start taking the pins out and fixing that. And also this K2 bomb on Moon in Scorpio is like all the pins that you've all collected throughout your whole long life, deep-seated childhood stuff, needs to come up and explode out so that we can heal it. Because if it stays repressed, it won't be healed. If we maintain this status quo of being nice, nothing gets healed. We need to actually get things out in order to fix them. So that's a lot of what's operating for us all right now. And I hope this is helpful to you. And I hope that you find yourself in a really accessible place during this eclipse, that you're not busy doing things. I know here it's like the middle of the night, so we have to make an active effort to stay awake and to be present for this eclipse. But certainly, as we start to get to the East Coast of the United States and anywhere in Europe or further, the time will be much later in the day, and you'll probably be, at work or doing errands or whatever. And I've been in that situation myself, even as an astrologer, where I had to do something, either drive or work or something during an eclipse. And it's like my least favorite thing to do. But maybe even in that setting, you can take those 15 minutes of time from 1:11 to 1:25 a.m. and really try to find some, and that's Hawaii time, of course, but whatever time zone you're in, and really find some time to just sit still at your desk or not drive, park the car somewhere, just something to allow yourself to really experience anything that does come to you, any messaging, any awarenesses, any signs that do come through and to you. And I hope to see you again soon. If you haven't already signed up on my website, it's www.radhahomeyoga.com. Aloha. Namaste.